Hi guys, welcome back to Brew and Build. This week I've got a beer that I have been not sure whether I'd even show you, to be honest. I've been umming and ahhing about this for a few months as to whether I'd even put this one on. It's a beer I guess I've been working on this for well over a year now. I've done probably 4 or 5 attempts at this, and I've since rebrewed it again differently as a bit of an experiment of a change of ingredients after this one even. What I've been trying to, I'm not cloning it. I'm not trying to sell this as a clone by any means, but I'm using as inspiration Guinness West Indies Porter, which is a beer that I really love. My wife and I drink it quite often. If you haven't had West Indies Porter, it essentially starts with, you know, the base of Guinness, if you like. It's 6% alcohol. It's quite sweet. It's got, if you look around at people that are trying to copy the recipe, people will describe an unidentifiable caramel flavour that they can't quite get. And I personally think that caramel flavour is molasses. That's what I get out of the beer. So it's a chocolatey roasted beer, reasonably high in alcohol, quite clean yeast fermentation flavour, with a burnt caramel and molasses aftertaste is essentially the beer that I'm after. So that's what I've tried to replicate to some degree in this one. I'll run you through the recipe that I've used for this one. I've started off with a base of 3.6 kilograms of pale malt. Don't need to say any more about that. I've then gone into the roast barley. So 400 grams of, I'm using best roast barley. I don't think it would matter which unmalted roast barley you use. Now 400 grams is a reasonable amount of roasted barley, and because of that the beer will need time to condition. It's not going to be great straight away. And sticking on the roast barley, I've tried this many different ways to get the taste that I want. I've tried late mash additions just in the mash out section to try and get a smoother taste. I've tried it halfway through the mash. I've tried various different things. In the end, what I'm sticking with is just put the roast barley in at the beginning of the mash and mash the whole thing through. I don't think I could ever, this is the conclusion I've come to with anything Guinness, I don't think I can clone the taste of Guinness, because I think their proprietary roast malt is, whatever it is they're doing is just slightly different, that I don't get that taste out of any other roasted barleys I've used. So we're never going to be bang on, and hence the reason I don't think this is going to ever be a clone of it. Then I'm going to put in, after that, is 300 grams of flaked barley, so unmalted flaked barley. That's going to give it, it gives it a lot of body, it gives it a really silky smoothness, and it also helps a lot with head retention. So then we get into the sort of the sweet flavour sections of this, I guess. I'm using, okay, this is Simpson's crystal malt I'm using, and I think that's reasonably important here. I find Simpson's crystal malt different to most other crystal malts. I think it's much more toffee-like. In their darker crystal malts, it's really toffee and really burnt sugar flavoured, more so than quite a few others. So I've used 100 grams of Simpson's dark crystal, and I've used 100 grams of Simpson's extra dark crystal, and that will really give it that burnt toffee caramel backbone flavour that this needs. To up the alcohol, without it all being too thick and too malty. What I've put in is 200 grams of just plain white sugar. Now the alcohol of that will obviously add to the sweet part of the beer, but it will also thin it back a little bit and makes it a little bit more drinkable, and a little bit more approachable, I suppose. And then we get into the molasses part. One of my original attempts on this was with quite a lot of blackstrap molasses, and the fermentation got it actually got an infection in it, and that didn't help. But the amount of blackstrap molasses, the sulfur that came off it during fermentation was unbelievable. I mean, it was so strong you couldn't walk in the front door of the house without holding your nose, pretty much, and it was fermenting out in one of the back rooms. I mean, it really stank, and I had to throw that batch out. So I ended up backing off a lot through the process on the blackstrap molasses. So what I've put in is 40 grams of blackstrap molasses, and it's not a huge amount, but it does, I think, seem to work. So that is the grain bill, the fermentable bill. The next section is the hops. So what I've got is 25 grams of Northern Brewer, and that gives a fairly soft and smooth bittering hops. That's 25 grams going in at 60 minutes. And I've got 20 grams of Target hops going in at 60 minutes as well. It gives a total IBU of about 48 IBU. The yeast I was going to use in this was White Labs Edinburgh Ale yeast. I was going to ferment it at a very cool temperature to keep it nice and clean. That didn't go right, and you'll see in the brewing section of the video as to what happened there. So I had to change that out, and we'll come back to that during the tasting. The water profile on this is quite light, but it is heavy on the malty side. So it's 2 to 1 on the calcium chloride side, and that gives a really malty profile, which I think this needs, and a real sort of smoothness and a bit of body to it. So we'll cut through to the brewing section, have a look at that, and then we'll come back and we'll open this up and have a taste. Right, I was about to pitch my yeast starter in this, and my yeast starters I generally decant off half to 3/4 of the starter after the yeast settled out of it. As part of that decanting, I always taste the starter to make sure it's okay. And I've got to say that this starter tastes absolutely awful. For the British viewers, it tastes like TCP. I think you'll know exactly what I'm talking about there. For everybody else, it basically tastes like some sort of antiseptic. So I would say that there's an infection or something wrong with my stock of frozen yeast on this Scottish ale yeast. So I won't be using that, unfortunately, because that's the ideal yeast that I had for this. Instead, what I'm going to have to go for is pretty much the cleanest tasting yeast that I've got, and that is Safal SO5. It's not ideal because I won't get some of those light esters that I want from it. It'll end up being a very, very clean fermentation. It should still be okay. It's a reasonable substitute, I think, for this. It's just not the ideal of what I wanted. Anyway, I'll get this in there, and then I'm going to chuck all of that out, and I'll have to chuck out all my frozen stock of it as well, and I'll have to restock with a new batch. Anyway, I'll put this in now. Okay, so now we're caught up on the brewing process. Let's get this open and have a taste. So it's a lovely, lovely dark colour. Really dark colour, good head on it. Nice tan coloured head. I get that in there. So you can't really see through it. You can see a little bit at the bottom, and it's a very, very, very deep ruby colour, but very, very hard to see through. The smell is close to Guinness. It's really quite prominent on that roast barley, chocolate, coffee, sort of espresso notes that you get out of any Guinness product. So we're on the right route there. You can also smell, just lightly, you can smell that molasses in there, and hopefully you can taste it. Now, I'm saying hopefully you can taste it. I know you can taste it because this is now, it's just coming up to 5 months old. This has been in the bottles. And we've had quite a number of them over the time. So I know exactly what to expect here. And you get real espresso coming through. There's a really strong, slightly chocolatey, coffee taste. If you imagine really, really strong coffee that you've mixed in some burnt sugar, some almost burnt sugar with, that's what you're really sort of getting out of this. But there's a little something in it that, if I didn't know what the ingredients were, I would struggle to work out. And I think that's what people that I read their recipes are struggling to work out. It's molasses. It's that molasses taste. Now, it's not very strong. It's quite hard to identify as molasses, and I think, with the amount of trial and error I've done on this, it's that dark crystal malt and the extra dark crystal malt is working with the molasses to bring out a slightly stronger molasses flavour than 40 grams really should bring out in a dark beer like this. You could easily go stronger on the molasses, there's no doubt about it. You could double that without any problem, but I think that works as a really subtle, slightly unusual toffee flavour note to it. Now, the elephant in the room is the yeast, of course. I wanted that to be Edinburgh Ale yeast. I actually think it really works well with the US-05 that's in there. It's so clean. There's no yeast note to this at all. It's all malt and sugar and molasses. I'm not even sure I can really pick out hops. I mean, there's obviously hops taste there, but it's really all just the malts that's in there, which is what it should be. You know, a good porter, I don't think should be particularly, well, an Irish porter, Irish stout, Irish porter, I don't think should be yeast derived. It should be clean. So would I do this with the Edinburgh Ale yeast? Actually, yes, and that's what I've rebrewed it with to trial it, and you'll see that one in probably a few months when it ages and conditions well. If you do brew this, I'm going to drink again because it's really good. It is such a good beer. If you do brew this, you could change out this yeast, and if you did, I would go for an Irish ale yeast. That'd be the only thing I think I'd change it out for in this particular recipe. I really think this works well with the US-05, and of course, being a dry yeast, it's so easy to use. Why make it more difficult with a liquid yeast? It just works really, really well. But if you do brew it, age it. It will take 2 months, 3 months for it all to blend together properly. For the first 1 or 2 months, we drank this and went, yeah, it's okay. But after about 2 months, it was not okay. It was really, really good. So I'm going to finish this off. I was hoping the sun was going to come out, but it's just ducked behind the cloud completely again. So I might pop inside into the slightly warmer area, finish this off. Until then, till the next beer, life's good, drink more beer.